Welcome to today's webinar, Pandemic Response, Understanding How to Apply for and Use CARES Act Funding. My name is David Nash. I'm the director of the Legal One program, and we are so grateful to have the New Jersey Department of Education partnering with us to provide you with critical information regarding the CARES Act. Next slide. So we have a wonderful group of presenters who are with us today. And again, I can't thank the Department of Education enough for working closely with us on this critical issue. So from the Department of Education, you'll be hearing from Kathy Ealing, Director of the Office of Fiscal and Data Services, Leslie Franks-McCrae, Director of the Office of Supplemental Educational Programs, Martin Egan, Acting Director of the Office of Grants Management, and Constance Weber, who is the ESSA non-public ombudsman and works in the Office of Interdistrict Choice in Non-Public Schools. So we are very, very happy to have all of those representatives from the department with us. And as we have for almost all of our webinars, we also have Rebecca Gold, who is currently Interim Director of Human Resources for Hamilton Township School District and has been instrumental in working with us on so many of our webinars and our various Legal One programs. So thank you everyone for agreeing to be part of this important presentation. Next slide. As we walk through the information today, many of you have been to prior Legal One sessions. Of course, we're trying to give you the best information we can, the very latest legal information and factual information. We are not giving you legal advice as we do this. We always encourage you to take the information we're providing. And if you do have specific questions, speak with your legal counsel. And certainly for those of you who are NJPSA members, you can always reach out to NJPSA's legal department, and we're very happy to respond to questions that you might have. Next. Couple of housekeeping items before we get ourselves started. We do want to encourage you as we go, if you have questions that you're thinking of, you're probably not the only one, type your questions in. There is a bar on the right side of your screen that allows you to type questions in during the presentation. We will share all of the questions that are typed in with the New Jersey Department of Education. We do have close to 700 individuals signed up for today's webinar. So we don't anticipate that we will be able to answer all of the questions during the hour and 15 minutes or so that we have, but we will capture all those questions, and we will try to address a number of questions, as many as we can, during the session today. We're going to plan to do that after all of our presentations. We'll build in that time. You should also know that the recording of today's session and the handouts will be emailed to each of you, along with a certificate of attendance, and you should receive that within 24 hours. We will also be posting the recording from today's session and the handouts on our website. It usually takes several hours for us to have that ready, but by some point this evening, we will have that information available on our website for anyone to be able to access. Next slide. So a couple of key goals that we wanted to make sure we cover today. We want to provide some background information for all of you on the CARES Act and specifically on the ESSER fund that's available, some of the purposes for that funding, how the allocation process works, how districts apply for funding, what the allowable uses are, and we're going to talk through those particular areas. The requirement for equitable services for non-public schools, the monitoring requirements that are in place for districts who are receiving funds, and we want to give you some information, some best practices for utilizing available funding and some tools to help you with prioritizing and making decisions about how you are going to use these funds in your school district. Next slide. So before I turn this over to our wonderful partners with the department, just point out a couple of things. We will give you this PowerPoint that has active links built into it. So here you see one of the links that when you receive the PowerPoint, you will be able to click on and access. This was the broadcast email that was sent out from the Department of Education on May 11th, outlining the CARES Act funding process, and that includes lots of great information. It's critical that as you look at that information, you keep in mind how important it is to engage in a collaborative process to prioritize and determine how best to use this funding in your school district. And it will be different from district to district. There are 12 particular areas that are outlined in the guidance. I'll just mention a couple of them. And certainly it's not to say these are the only important issues, but a couple of quick points. So one of the allowable uses that we thought is important from the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association is that this funding could be used to provide principals, school principals, and other school leaders with the resources necessary to address the needs of their individual schools. So that's important. It is critical that we engage in that collaborative process and have that input from principals. We also want to think about the unique needs of low-income students, children with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students dealing with homelessness, foster care youth, and to think about some of these at-risk populations or student populations with special needs, and think about how we might use this funding to provide services for those students. And of course, we have so many students who are struggling with mental health issues that in some cases have been exacerbated by the global pandemic, and funding can be used to provide mental health services and support. So this is just 3 examples from the allowable list, and you will be hearing a much more detailed explanation of all the allowable areas. Next slide. So with that, let me turn this presentation over to Kathy Ealing, who will kick us off and kind of walking through some key issues for all of you to be aware of.
Thank you very much, David. We're very excited to be here today. Again, my name is Kathy Ealing. I'm the Director of the Office of Fiscal and Data Services within the Division of Student Services at the Department of Education. I've been part of a small collaborative working group that has been working around the clock to get this application out to LEAs to review all of the guidance that's been provided by the United States Department of Education, and to put programs together like this so that we can help all of you use this money effectively for your students. Next slide. Next slide. So some background. As many of you are probably aware, the CARES Act, or the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, was passed by President Trump. It provided for $30.9 billion in funding for the United States Department of Education. And as part of that funding, there were 4 specific funding sources. We are going to be concerned only with one today, the Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Fund, or the ESSER Fund. You may have heard or seen some information about the Governor's Fund with the fund acronym of GERF, but my understanding is that those funds are going to be allocated for higher education. And so for our LEAs, we will be focusing on the ESSER Fund, and all of the information that we're going to share with you today relates to that Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Fund. Next slide. $13.5 billion was allocated specifically for the ESSER Fund, or the Elementary and Secondary School Fund. It was allocated to all of the states according to the Title I, Part A that the state received in 2019-2020. So we did not get the same exact amount that we received in our 1920 allocation, although we did receive a significant amount of funding. It was over $310 million that came to the New Jersey Department of Education. 90% of that money was allocated to LEAs according to the Title I, Part A formula, or proportion from 1920. and 10% is being kept as a state level or state level set aside, and that's inclusive of a certain percentage for administrative costs at the state level as well. Today, we're going to be focused primarily on the 90% that went out as a formula to all of the LEAs, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about allowable uses for those funds, how the allocations were done. As David mentioned, we're going to talk about the monitoring, equitable services, and hopefully give you everything that you need to move forward with budgeting and using these funds wisely. Next slide. So here is a timeline for you. The money was made available this spring. We received it actually just a couple of weeks ago. It's been a very quick process. As soon as we received our funds, we began working on the application, reviewing all of the guidance that was made available. Marty Egan, who is the director of the Office of Grants Management, is going to walk you through what is a pretty simple application process. It takes into account the allowable uses of the funds and budgeting. The money will be available to you almost immediately upon filling out your application, and you can charge back all the way till March 13th. So any costs, allowable costs incurred back to March 13th can be charged or used with this money. So we are making the allocations, or you are submitting your applications now. We have to have all of the money out to you within or by September 30th of 2021. That's the last date that the state is allowed to make the awards. And you can obligate or subgrant those funds all the way through September 30th of September 30th, 2022. Okay, next slide. So we have created a dedicated website at the Department of Education for this information. I don't know if you can read, that's a little small there, but that is the link. So if you go to the Department of Education's website, you'll see that there's a main link for just coronavirus information. If you click on that link and then go to schools and districts, from there, you will see this particular icon for the CARES Act. We modeled this after what the United States Department of Education has on their website. So if you once you click on that link, there is additional information available right now that you can go to and download and read through, similar to all of the information that we are providing to you in this presentation. Okay, next slide. And again, there is the link. And all of these here that you see on this web page, this is the Department of Education, our web page. Those are all drop-down links. So when you click on them, they expand and they just provide additional information to you, an overview. The allocation tables are there. There is downloadable information on the use of funds, equitable services, the period of grant funding. All of that information is there for you in one page. You can also, on the right-hand side, you'll see there is an actual link to the application itself through eWig. So we have all of that organized for you in one place. If there's anything that you still have questions about after today, you can go to that page and find some really helpful information there as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to move on to talking about the allocations. Next slide, please. So the allocations were done according to guidance that was issued by the United States Department of Education. We were told that we must allocate at least 90% of the total fund that we received, that the department received, and that was done. And it was done in proportion to the amount of funds that an LEA received under Title I Part A, again for the 2019-2020 school year. So that was the proportion that was used to allocate the 90% of funds that the state received. It's important to note, because there has been some confusion, because we keep saying Title I Part A was the allocation formula. These are not, however, Title I Part A funds. When we talk about the allowable uses of funds, you'll see that the allowable uses are incredibly broad. Not only are they allowable, you can use them for allowable uses under ESEA and IDEA and Perkins. There are additional 12 allowable uses that are quite broad and are designed to really address the issues that LEAs are facing as a result of closures due to COVID-19. Next slide. Okay, it's important to note that these amounts here listed on this slide were not included as part of the proportion when we were determining the allocations for each of the LEAs. So we did not include any additional 17 or 18 carryover funds that may have been in your 19-20 allocations. We did not include reallocated funds. And again, this is directly from guidance that was issued by the United States Department of Education. They issued a frequently asked questions document, as well as an equitable services document. So we followed those guidance documents when making these decisions about how to do the allocations. We did not include any funds that were received for school improvement, any funds reserved for direct services, funds that were received for Title I-D, any reductions an LEA may have been subject to for a failure to meet maintenance of effort, any adjustments from FY 2018, and we did not include any Title I-A funds that an LEA declined. So we have received some questions. If an LEA declined 2019-2020 Title I Part A funds, they did not receive an allocation from the 90% or the formula portion of our ESSER funds. And that is in accordance with the guidance issued by US Department of Ed. So again, we've gotten some questions about that. There were LEAs that may have been eligible for Title I Part A funds in 2019-2020. But if those funds were declined, then an LEA was not eligible to receive CARES fund from the 90% or formula portion of our allocation. The department is planning to provide funds from the state set aside or the 10% portion to those what we're calling non-Title I LEAs. We are working to finalize plans to do that, and hopefully we'll have information to those LEAs within the next couple of weeks. Next slide. We also, per the guidance from US DOE, funds were set aside from that 90% and had to be to cover any new or significantly expanding charter schools for the 19-20 school year. So in New Jersey, we did not have any new charter schools, but we do have charter schools that meet the definition for significantly expanding for the 19-20 school year. So right now, these allocations that all LEAs have received are considered preliminary because we have to wait until we have the final counts for our charter schools, which will come through our October 15th NJ Smart collection, and then final allocations will be made. So there is a possibility that LEAs will be receiving another smaller allocation in the spring or early, excuse me, not spring, but early or late winter, January, February of next year. Once we know exactly how much money we are using for the new expanding charter schools, any money not used to cover those charter schools will then be redistributed to all of the LEAs. So final allocations will actually be made in early 2021, and you will be asked to go in and complete an amendment through EWIG to access the rest of your funds at that time. Okay, next slide. So these funds are available actually for obligation for 2 years. So they are available through September 30th of 2022. That does include the tidings period. So again, they are available for obligation through September 30th of 2022. We expect that the final report will be open immediately following that to be completed approximately October 15th so that we can draw down and close out all of the funding as we need to do at the State Department. We've gotten a lot of questions about supplement, not supplant. These funds are considered a completely separate stream of funding. Again, they are not Title I Part A funds. They are not IDEA funds. They are a separate CARES allocation, and there is no supplement, not supplant requirement for these funds. ESSER funds can or may take the place of state or local funds for any allowable activities. And we'll talk more about the allowable activities, but as we said earlier, they are extremely broad. There is, however, a state maintenance of effort requirement, so that the state is required to, or it is designed to stop the state from substantially reducing their support for K through 12 education. Okay, next slide. And again, if you have questions about any of the allocations, that information is posted on our website. Next slide, please. Again, just this is an example of what the allocations look like. They are listed by county and the table is available online. Next question. I'm sorry, next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Marty Egan, who is our Director of the Office of Grants Management, to walk through what the application looks like. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Marty Egan, Director of Grants Management. I want to take you a brief walkthrough through an application that the team built. We've tried to build an application that was simple to use, but contained everything that we needed, including the allowable uses. The thought in mind was to get these applications approved as quickly as possible, to get the funds out to the district as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. As Kathy had said, the project period is March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2022, with a 15-day liquidation period that ends October 15th, October of 2022. Next slide, please. And this is where I'd like to do the live demo to demonstrate the application. Now, we do have applications that are approved currently. We have about 26 applications that are approved as of this morning. So the sooner they get in, the quicker we approve. So right here is the CARES application, and here is the overview page with a direct link to the legislation there at the bottom. It's a brief description of what the purpose is for. And if we can move to the next tab, the contact tab, all this is pre-populated from our general contacts. And on the bottom is the care contact, the person in charge of that. With that phone number, we will, if we have any issues at all, we will contact that person or email them. And we can go back up. The allocation detail page includes the breakout and the equitable share for the non-publics. The next tab is for additional non-public schools. We do not believe anybody will need to use this, but it is there as just in case. As Kathy had touched on, there's 12 allowable uses. These 12 allowable uses on this page are all directly from the guidance. If they check a box for an allowable use, they are required to enter a need right underneath that. So that tells us what they're doing and why they're doing it. Now, the good part is in the budget pages here, we'll go to a budget, the budget, and if we can go into the 100 on the second row of tabs there, and we're going to click the third row of tab, instructional expenditures. You see that there. There you go. And right here, you're going to see they entered 2 line items, and those 2 line items are directly related to the allowable uses that they selected in the prior page. These 2 tabs are the meat of the application. These 2 tabs tell us what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you're spending the money. There's an assurance tab after this. And these assurances were agreed to on May 21st. I'm starting to lose my sight now. From being at home all these times, looking at this computer all day long. And the submit tab. This is the application. I think this team did a great job developing a simple application I'm waving my 11-year-old off right now. I'm sorry. We did a simple application, and this is very easy for us to approve. We have staff, extra resources in our department helping to approve these applications. These applications will be approved as quickly as possible. My goal is to have all of these approved within 10 days of submission. So just so everybody on the phone call knows, if you get these in now before the ESEA comes in or the ESSA applications come in, we will get these approved for you. That is all I have at this point. I'm going to kick it over to, I believe, Constance is next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Constance Webster. I'm the ESEA Non-Public Ombudsman, and my role with this program and with the ESSA program is to ensure that equitable services are provided by the LEAs to their non-public schools. I'm just going to go through briefly the responsibilities for both the LEAs and the non-public schools in ensuring that equitable services are provided. Next slide, please. Under the CARES Act, and I want to reference something that Kathy had said, the LEA provides equitable services to all students and teachers in the non-public schools that are located within their LEA sending area. This is, Kathy had referenced Title I, and the guidance references Title I frequently, and I've been getting a lot of questions from districts asking if they need to find their Title I students or find their non-public students that live outside or that attend non-public schools outside their sending area. You only have to serve the non-public schools that reside within your sending area. The location of the children where they live is not a part of this the provision of equitable services. So any non-public that resides within your sending area are the non-public schools with it whom you have to consult with. And those non-public schools will be listed in your application. The non-public schools have to be not-for-profit, and they have to be registered with the NJDOE. Past participation in a federal program such as Title I is not a requirement for a non-public school to receive an equitable share of CARES Act funding. So for example, if a non-public school chose not to participate in Title I last year, they still are eligible to receive an equitable share of these CARES Act funds. But as a reminder, just want to emphasize, you only consult with those non-public schools that exist within your sending area. Next slide, please. The LEA has control of the funds. The services for non-public students and teachers is provided through the LEA or with a contract through a third-party provider, such as an Ed Service Commission. Very similar to ESSA services being provided. The funds may not go directly to the non-public school. I've received numerous questions about paying for salaries of existing teachers. The same provision for ESSA funds is applied to these funds. If you were to provide salaries, those individuals in the non-public school would have to be hired by or contracted by the LEA. Monies do not go directly to the non-public school. That's no different than ESSA funds. Next slide, please. The LEA is responsible for initiating consultation. Again, the LEA is going to contact those non-public schools that exist within their sending area. We strongly recommend, and it's almost a given, that the consultation will occur virtually through a Zoom meeting or a phone call, any kind of contact that you can make with the non-public schools to discuss how the equitable share will be provided to the non-public school in services. I want to emphasize on this slide the New Jersey School Directory. We've updated that directory. So if you go to the link, and you don't have to do it now, every non-public school that's listed in the directory is a non-public school that filled out the non-public enrollment report, which means that those non-public schools are registered with the state of New Jersey. It's the most up-to-date list of non-public schools that we have, the NJDOE, for the state of New Jersey. And I strongly recommend, if you're having trouble contacting your non-public schools, to look at that directory to make sure you have the most up-to-date contact information. And additionally, I want to emphasize this new includes for-profit and not-for-profit status. So if you have, there's oftentimes non-public schools that receive an equitable share because they have a kindergarten. And I'm thinking of small, I can't remember the name. I think it's Kitty Care, or it's a non-public. It's for-profit. They get state funds, so they register with the state of New Jersey, but they don't get federal funds because they're for-profit. So if you have small non-public schools within your sending area and you wonder if perhaps they're for-profit, please consult the New Jersey School Directory, and that will be listed in the directory. Next slide, please. The LEA, as with most federal funds, is required to consult, and the CARES guidance requires that the LEA provide to the State Department of Education a signed affirmation of consultation. I provided the link. Sal, can you click on it? So I ensured that the form was PDF fillable, so that there's no need to get a concern for an actual physical signature. You can do electronic signatures on this form, and it can be submitted electronically. It's a very basic consultation form. I'm asking you for the school name, or the LEA's district, and the non-public school's name and their code. It lists all of the allowable expenses, 1 through 11, that the Federal CARES Act provides. And it asks for an agreement to participate, and that consultation occurred, or a decline to participate. The LEA and the non-public school official will sign it and date it. If the non-public school declines to participate, you would refuse those funds in the application, and the non-public school equitable share would move back into the application and get distributed, among all the remaining participants in the application. Sal, can you go back to the slide, please? Thank you. When you get the signed affirmation of consultation, you would submit it. The LEA submits it to the email address listed, caresactconsultation@doe.nj.gov. I'm collecting those to ensure that we receive them. I would appreciate it. I've been getting a handful of emails from the actual non-public schools who are submitting the signed affirmation of consultation without the LEA signature. And it's obviously non-publics are confused about that. But if you could, as the districts, please ensure that the signature on the form has both the LEA signature and the non-public school signature. Thank you. Next slide. One last slide regarding participation. If the non-public school declines to participate, again, as I had just said, the LEA would refuse those funds in the application, and the funds would get distributed among the remaining participants. In the federal guidance for equitable services in the CARES Act, and I'm taking this word for word, if a non-public does not respond to an LEA's efforts to make contact, the LEA has no further responsibility to provide equitable services. If this occurs, an LEA must demonstrate that it made good faith effort to contact the non-public schools. So what I'm asking the LEAs out there is to please, if you're having trouble contacting your non-public school, check the non-public school, the school directory link that I provided. Make sure you have the right contact information. You may not. And if you're having further difficulty, I would appreciate it if you could let me know. I've had a few districts let me know, and I've been able to assist in getting them the most recent contact information. If you can't contact a non-public school and they do not respond, you have the right to assume that they're not participating in this program and refuse the funds on the non-public school's behalf. When you do that, you need to still submit the affirmation of consultation with a note indicating that you could not contact the non-public school and you're refusing the funds on their behalf. Next slide, please. And I think I'm turning it over to Leslie to speak about allowable uses.
No, that is actually Kathy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm back. That's okay. Thanks, Constance. So for the allowable uses, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. We have on our website all of this information in a downloadable form. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through these slides. We want to highlight some of the suggestions that we have, but you may find it helpful to go to the website that I shared earlier in the presentation and actually download. It's almost I want to say it's a 5-page document with different suggestions on how to use the funds. But generally speaking, the funds are actually designed as emergency relief. So what the application said that the State Department submitted to the United States Department of Ed is that we were going to ensure that the funds would be used to continue to provide educational services such as remote learning, developing and implementing plans for the return to normal operations, and to ensure that LEAs had the resources they need to address issues related to closures for COVID, due to COVID. So there are 12 allowable uses. The first allowable use is extremely broad, and it is essentially that you may use these funds for any activity that is authorized by the ESEA, IDEA, Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, Perkins, or McKinney-Vento. So any already allowable activity is allowable under for any of these particular statutes. Note again, I saw someone had asked in the chat, the funds are not subject to supplement, not supplant. Okay, next slide. So in addition to these authorized activities, there are specific activities that are allowable related to COVID. So you can use them for any type of activity related to coordination of preparedness and response efforts to prepare and respond to coronavirus, providing principals and building leaders with additional resources that they might need for their schools, developing and implementing procedures and systems to improve preparedness and response efforts, any other activities that may be necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services, including continuing to employing existing staff. On the next slide, you'll see that what we've done is we've taken those larger buckets and given some very specific suggestions. And again, this is comes directly from the guidance document that's on our website. So I'm not going to spend too much time reading through these, but things like providing professional development, developing leadership teams, working with your community-based organizations, ensuring that all of your vulnerable populations, including homeless students experiencing homelessness or students with disabilities, are addressed. Next slide. Again, some more specific examples there. Alternate means of engagement, coaching, training to families, very broad uses. Next slide. Under Perkins, again, you could be developing virtual internships, supporting employability skill development tutorials, anything that would be allowable under Perkins as well. Next slide. And then again, these are the two additional larger buckets. You can use them for any activities to address the unique needs of low-income children or students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, youth in foster care, including any outreach services or outreach delivery services. anything related to planning for and coordinating during long-term closures, including how to provide meals. So what we have done in the application, which Marty demonstrated earlier, is what are in these blue squares here, that's exactly what you will see in the application. So each of these blue squares is an allowable use. And if you want to budget funds under a particular activity, you click on that activity, and then underneath that a text box opens and you explain how you are going to budget your funds. Next slide. So again, some very specific examples of how you could use those funds to meet those activities: consultation, coaching, delivery of instruction throughout your district. Next slide. Providing additional instructional services to address gaps in learning for any of those populations of students. Again, these are not Title I Part A funds, so it can be for any students that you feel need additional or remedial learning. You can contract with vendors to provide those services or work with community-based organizations. Next slide. I'm going to move through this to the next slide. You can read through some of these. We'll make these available. So again, here are two of these additional allowable uses: training and professional development for staff of the LEA on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases, or you can use it for purchasing supplies, installing sanitation stations. Purell sanitation stations can be installed throughout your school buildings, throughout your administrative buildings. Some of the applications that have come in so far, that's what many LEAs are choosing to spend some of their funds on. You can purchase masks, you can purchase PPE, personal protective equipment, for your staff with these funds. Next slide. So again, we've given just some specific examples. You can purchase disinfectant materials, cleaning supplies, installing sanitation systems. You can contract with professionals or vendors to come in and clean your buildings. These funds can be used for any of those activities. Next slide. Again, just some specific examples of how you could use the funds to meet those needs. Next slide. One of the main focuses for this funding is to think about remote learning and purchasing whatever educational technology you may need. Chromebooks, iPads, connectivity, Wi-Fi for students that are served by your LEA. So this is, again, could be assistive technology, adaptive equipment. This is one of the primary goals of the CARES funds, is to ensure that students during this time of school closure still have access to instruction. Next slide. So again, we've provided some specific examples of what you could do with these funds, including actually purchasing the technology or the connectivity, purchasing the assistive technology devices, offering training, professional development, supplemental instruction, after school, during school, after school or during summer hours. Funds can be used to meet any of those needs. Next slide. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. You can read some of those. Again, we'll keep going. We're trying to give you a lot of different ideas here. Providing mental health services and supports. Again, another critical need for students during this time. So on the next slide, you'll see again some very specific ways you can contract with staff. You can work with your community and mental health partners to provide counseling, either virtually or when schools are back in session. Hiring staff and providing counseling or services would be another acceptable or allowable use for these funds. Next slide. Again, perhaps using telehealth, hiring staff, working with community partners, thinking about our most vulnerable populations and how we're going to meet the needs of our students and our staff in dealing with issues, mental health issues during this very difficult time. Next slide, I'm sorry. The funds can be used, this is again one of those larger buckets from the United States Department of Ed, planning and implementing activities related to summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, including classroom instruction, online learning during summer months, addressing the needs of low-income students with disabilities, There's a question for the chat about special education compensatory. Yes, they can be used for compensatory services. They could be used for remedial services, enrichment activities, bridging the gap activities, anything related to needs of students that were impacted by the closures. Next slide. And again, we've given just some very specific ideas, suggestions on how you may budget those funds. Next slide. Some specific non-allowable uses that were outlined in our application to the United States Department of Ed. Funds cannot be used for subsidizing, or offsetting executive salaries or benefits. Cannot be used for any expenditures related to state or local teacher or faculty unions or associations, or for bonuses, merit pay, or any other expenditures. So those options are not in the application, so you will not be allowed to budget for any of those particular activities. So if we keep moving on, the next section, we're going to talk just a little bit briefly about the monitoring. There will be more information available about the monitoring in the next couple of months, but we just wanted to give you an idea. Next slide. These funds are subject to monitoring. So the Department of Ed has a risk assessment tool. This is just a little snippet. We have 11 indicators that we look at as part of that risk assessment tool, and one of them is the amount of federal funds that LEAs receive. So these funds will be included in that total pot. We will also be looking at the timeliness of application submissions and number of revision rounds. There's a number of different indicators that we look at. So we are required by the US DOE to monitor these funds, and we are submitting a monitoring plan. We are required to do that within 60 days of receipt of the funds, so that will be submitted to US Department of Ed shortly. On the next slide, depending upon what your score is from the risk assessment tool, the first triangle there is not clear. It's supposed to say collaborative monitoring. So we will be doing on-site collaborative monitoring to a select group of LEAs. We will be conducting desk monitoring, and there will also be a self-assessment of how these funds are used. So just be on the lookout for that. You will be receiving more information about monitoring as our plan is approved by the United States Department of Education. So now I'm going to turn it over to our Director of the Office of Supplemental Educational Programs, Leslie Franks-McCrae, to just talk a little bit about some ideas on how you can effectively budget and plan for the use of these funds.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. I don't plan on being long, and that's because New Jersey's districts and schools have always done and continues to do a phenomenal job with the continual improvement process. You can go to the next slide. Next slide. Thanks. Perfect. Of identifying the problem, collecting, examining, and really analyzing the data around the needs of their students, teachers, facilities, whatever it is, and then prioritizing and planning for those specific needs. As a result of the COVID-19, you've responded to requests from the Department for Remote Instruction and School Health-related closure plans. And now with the ESSER funding, and now that that's available, you can actually apply funds to your existing and any future COVID-19 plans. In addition, here at the department, we have been very strategic in providing guidepost checklists per se to assist in the development of your continual plans. As my colleague stated earlier, also upon acceptance of the ESSER funds, the regulations require that LEAs comply with all reporting requirements of the CARES Act, as well as you can plan on being monitored. What I've learned in the field of managing grants, and what many of us, I'm sure, learned during the American Recovery and Relief Act years, is to clearly describe and document your need. That is the gap or discrepancy between what is and what it should be. That's what the department is asking you to do in your ESSER applications. For example, I purchased 500 Chromebooks for my 3rd through 5th grades in April due to COVID-19, but now I need 750 to bridge the digital divide for those same grade levels. So your brief description will describe your April purchase plus the need to purchase the additional 250 Chromebooks. That description is for your record keeping and reporting and both New Jersey and federal monitoring. So now we're going to actually provide you with one more checklist. We wanted to provide you with a tool that you could use. Can you go to the next slide? Perhaps, okay. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers. They actually developed a brief restart and recovery guide and are actually in the process of developing templates and checklists for schools and districts to assist in planning efforts. I'd like to say here that New Jersey is actually one step ahead. To further assist you, we've drawn from the Restart and Recovery Guide, added additional items from research from a Harvard study, and prepared a checklist to help you identify gaps, prioritize your needs, and plan your ESSA budgets around the needs for physical school buildings, physical safety, health, both physical and mental, academic success for all students, and other consideration. And so for time's sake, I'm just going to touch on a few of the items. For physical school buildings, you may want to plan for placing protective barriers around secretaries and other staff who interact with the general public often. Next slide. Under academic success for all students, you may need to plan and budget for summer school and after school programs to mitigate learning loss. Next slide. Under health and physical and social emotional, you may want to establish a process and put resources in place to respond to a student or staff member in crisis. And the checklist goes on and on. And it also includes reminders to update your written policies and procedures, which I'm a stickler for, to provide guidance for staff, students, and parents now that we're in this new normal state. David will be sending the checklist as well as the slide presentation out to attendees. So this afternoon, we thank you all for your attention. The last slide provides you, if you can just go right through to the last slide, with our contact information. You can email any questions to the Title I. Next slide. Has it on there? Yes, to the
Go
Title
back. Yeah, go back one slide.
No, this is it. This is it. That's it. You can email any questions you may have to the Title I email box. Again, on behalf of the team DOE, we thank you for your attention this afternoon.
So thank you so much for what an incredible presentation the entire team put together for us today. We do have time for some questions, and I'll raise a couple, and I know Rebecca has been reviewing questions as well. We did ask for some clarification, or we did see questions regarding some clarification about what we mean by maintenance of effort. So for example, if a district made a one-time purchase of software, would they be committing to continuing to fund that software moving forward in future years?
So the maintenance of effort, this is Kathy, the maintenance of effort requirement is a state requirement. It is not an individual LEA requirement. So
Okay.
the state will have to report on that information.
Okay. If the district made a purchase, say in mid-March of cleaning supplies, would that be something that they would be able to have reimbursement for those purchases that were made that fall under allowable uses?
Yes, anything after March 13th and after would be allowable. Cleaning supplies, absolutely.
I think I know the answer to this one. Board of Education is expected to formally approve the district's submission. Should there be, is that correct?
I'm going to ask Marty to answer that one. Is there a Board of Ed certification in the application?
That's a great question. I believe there is. I believe there is a in the assurance page. I think you're assuring that you've met with the Board of Ed.
So we had a number of folks asking if the board there need to be minutes or some evidence that the board formally approved the application.
It'll be
The
just
answer-
in the assurance, right, Marty?
It's just in the assurance, yes.
Again,
is
though,
it-
if you are monitored, that could be something that would be asked during monitoring, so you'd want to make sure to have documentation to support that.
So we would certainly, I'm sure your board attorneys would agree with this, that you'd want your board to have a clear record at a meeting that they've approved the the application, so you have that documentation. What about charter schools and their ability to receive funding? We had a couple of folks from charter schools ask how that would work, and then there was a particular question about whether charter schools have to do the equitable services piece with non-public schools.
That's not me.
I'm just going to
So
answer the charter school equitable services. Charter schools do not have to consult with non-public schools.
In New Jersey, charter schools are considered LEAs, so they do receive allocations as any other LEA, and they are listed on our list of LEAs on that allocation page.
And I'll ask one more, and then Rebecca, I'm sure you'll have some others. In the category of looking at individual school needs based on what school principals identify, are there any particular guideposts that we should be thinking about there? It's a very broad category, and obviously individual schools have very unique needs. Any additional guidance on how we think about that allowable use?
No, and that is not my dog in the background, by the way.
One of our presenters, I think, has a dog.
I don't know whose dog that is.
We might want to mute.
No, I just wanted to add that the checklist is very extensive, and so if can you put the checklist out and they can see how detailed it is, and that should provide some guidance in addition to the allowable uses guidance that is on our website. So you can see here physical school buildings, the academic success, health, physical, and social emotional. Can you keep scrolling? Thanks. Next page. It's actually 3 pages.
Great.
So
That's
it's
very
a
helpful.
great tool for using technology, transportation, very detailed.
Great. Rebecca, I know you were screening questions as well. What questions did you see?
We have some very basic housekeeping questions. Can the grant be amended once it's approved?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay,
Yes.
Excellent.
So it can be amended. Is there, I imagine that there would have to be some end date for when you could amend the application.
Yeah, we usually shoot for 90 days before the end of the project period to have all amendments wrapped up.
Okay. So it's a significant period of time to
Yes.
make it. And if a district for some reason didn't apply right away for funding, do they miss their opportunity if they have not applied by June 19th?
No, we will be flexible with the dates. The June 19th is a guide because there's 5 big applications that the districts are working on right now. So there's the Alyssa's law compliance piece that the districts are working on. There's IDEA that the districts are working on. The big ESSA grant is also available, and the Perkins grant as well as this. So we were forced to stagger the applications in order for us, and that's us meaning OGM and the people who are helping us approve the applications, If we get them in by the 19th, we can guarantee we can get these approvals turned around for you.
Right. Okay. Go ahead,
We had
Rebecca.
another, thank you. We had another question about, is there any allowable administrative fees?
No, there is not.
Okay, and just as a repeat, the PowerPoint will be sent to everybody that registered. It does have the checklist and the links are active. So you will get everything that was shown to you here. We had another question on transportation. Can the money be used for more buses for school, for social distancing, to avoid that many children on a bus going to school, et cetera?
Yes, so transportation is already an allowable cost under other, you know, the larger category under some of the other funds. So that would already in some cases be allowable, but if you're doing it specifically for social distancing, then that would meet the requirement that you are preparing for and responding to coronavirus. So you could make that, you know, explanation in your grant application as to why that would be needed. Social distancing and is one of the you know, anything you need to do to prepare for that and to keep children safe is one of the allowable uses.
Okay,
And again, just to reiterate the allowable uses, you've got some really large buckets. You know, anything that's permissible under IDEA, for example, which is a really broad category, obviously.
and we had one more about leasing hardware. Is that an allowable expense to lease Chromebooks, hardware, things like that?
Yes. Technology related to virtual learning, remote learning, that is all allowable.
Thank you.
We do have some schools, you know, most school districts are receiving funding here. We do have some who are not. There was a question about other pools of funding that might be available for a district that's not eligible for funding under this particular program.
So there will be additional funding if they are what is considered a non-Title I school. So they either did not receive Title I funds in 2019-20, or they denied or refused funds. They will be receiving funds from the state set aside. That's the plan at this point, because the commissioner wants to ensure that all students receive the benefit of this funding. So we will have information for those LEAs in the next couple of weeks. We're finalizing that now. So there will be money available for that. We are also from the state set aside going to have right now, it's still in the development stages, but there will be additional grant money that LEAs can apply for. And all LEAs will be eligible for that as well. So we will come back to you with more information once that's final.
That's great. Any final advice for districts, as let's say a district is really struggling to make a choice, they've got 5 or 6 incredibly pressing needs. Any final thoughts about how districts figure out what to prioritize for this funding?
I think we've tried to, through the checklist and through the needs assessment, think about what questions to ask. I will tell you that the goal of the funding, it is considered emergency funding to address issues related to school closures and to COVID, to keeping children safe and to keeping children learning. So anything that can be done to address those 2 main areas, that's the intent of the program.
So this has been incredibly helpful. I want to thank all of you for being part of this presentation. I just have a couple of closing slides that I wanted to bring up. So if we could move to our next slide. We are offering another webinar for free as part of our pandemic response series regarding graduation and school closings, key legal and health considerations. That will be next Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. And we will include within the PowerPoint you're receiving an embedded link to sign up for that free webinar as well. Next slide. We also have offered, since March 18th, a series of free webinars to try to help everyone in the field. So we do build into today's PowerPoint links to the recordings, and in most cases, the PowerPoints from each of those webinars as well. So you can see the various issues where we've provided that type of information on this slide and our next slide. All the way through May 8th, where we offered a free webinar on addressing the needs of homeless students in partnership with a number of key providers in the field. Next slide. So with that, again, I can't thank all of you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedules to prepare this information, to present it to the field. I want to thank everyone in the field for the incredible work that you are doing. We're so grateful for everything you're doing for New Jersey's children, and how much you've done to immediately respond to such difficult circumstances. So thank you all for being part of this presentation, and I hope that we will have many of you for our webinar next Tuesday. Thank you everyone for being part of this.